what we call basic spread or the bread framework or tool set. And so I want to explain a little bit about that today. Yeah, and so because it's such a dry topic, I thought I'd lighten up the mood a little bit with some nice sketches here, which I draw. And I try to make it a little bit entertaining, but don't expect too much. Maybe first a bit about what I will be talking through today. I will first give a little bit of context to what we do or the problems that we need to solve. Where do they come from, and why do we encounter them? Then the roadblockers that we met along, which ultimately led us to the decision that we have to write our own or partly our own solution. That basically the world needs something better than what there is. So why we need something new? Then I will talk a bit about like what's the basis of our new solution that we propose, and then what is the actual solution that we have today that we can use and that we use today. So the first 3 bullet points are a bit more about like what happened 2 or 3 years ago, and then the 4th point is there. What do we have today? What can we present? How do we use it? And then the last point, quickly about how we think we will continue and where it leads us, and what people can expect. Yeah, so that's roughly what we're going to talk about today. Yeah, so let's give first a little bit of context here. So we have here this little car. Who has to drive from the left to the right? So what's on the right side? The right side is often a person or an organization coming to us or getting in touch with us, and somehow it turns out they need a system, double quotes, or they need a database somehow. And when you talk, then it often turns out it's something that's ERP-ish or CRM-ish. And as from what I see, who is right now listening, I think all of you know or know at least what I'm talking about here. So what that roughly means, right? I say ERP-ish and CRM-ish because both of these technologies are basically never a real match especially for mission organization, but I think even for many ministry organizations in general, because I think in the very core, our calling often is so much more about having close or good relationships with people, like basically in almost everything we do. And ERP is obviously much more on the financial and on the production side. And even the CRM, which is about relationships, but often much more about external relationships with external contacts and donors. And what we encounter is often much more about like internal networks of people. How can we manage them? So that's why we add the ish there. Yeah. So then, where are the people that we are or that seek to have database solution with us? Where are they coming from? What are their motivations? When I look at what we have done in the past 4 years, then there's like 4 main motivations, which are all slightly interconnected. One is what you see here, the Excel word access kind of heap. So basically, data or resources that are not in a multi-user or not in a, let's call it professional database stored, and that somehow need to be put into a more stable, more accessible system that's more structured. Yeah, that's kind of the first part. Especially, I mean, Excel files are so common. We'll come back to that at the end in the future part. Then the second one is workflows, enforcing of workflows. This gets basically, I would say, the more people are involved into a single system, the more important the handling of the workflow gets. And again, like the normal office we have very little features to manage or to define more complex workflows. So that's another one. Then of course automation is always like something that people want. That's kind of a core thought. Like we have this, but we want to make this automatic because we know it's possible. So that is definitely a core aspect. And then maybe the fourth point is maybe almost, it feels like it's the most prevalent point, is that staff staff that's retiring now, that means like office staff that has been in the office for the past 15 or 20 years. So basically the first generation that started to work with computers in the office, right? A lot of them are retiring, or maybe some are leaving, and then you have this position of somebody was working with data about the organization, about people, and now they're moving on, and now how do we get new people taking over that position on, and how do we introduce them to the workflows and the work that the previous person did. And then that seems often to be a place where they say, okay, we need to structure these things, or we need to have we cannot just copy the desktop folders of one of our last worker to the next one, and then everything will continue, right? So a more constrained environment for these data handling processes. Yeah, so that's basically left side where people are coming from, and right side where they want to go, and we have to drive them basically. And here now basically the problems that we need to solve on the way, that we need to cross basically is like one of the first things is we do often more of a domain-driven approach, although I'm not comfortable with using very strict labels, but domain-driven means that we look at the problem that somebody wants to solve, and then we try to come up with the according data model that can reflect that problem on the level of a computer or of a database storage. Let me have the water first. Okay. Then, so that's the interesting part for us, I guess, most of the time, the designing the data models. But one of the, I would say, the obvious part is migration, especially if you're coming from Excel, Word, and other small database or resources into a real data schema, structured data. Writing these migration, that's always a big part of what we have to solve. Then, of course, UI. We have to come up with some UI, and whatever we take, we will need to adjust it depending on what the first tests and the different iterations yield on feedback. Then the third point, business rules and workflows. I think that's obvious. They need to be implemented, and for somehow it's basically the core advantage that people are hoping for when they go from an unstructured system to a more structured database. And then, of course, setup maintenance. We always need to keep that in mind. We have to keep that as low as possible. Just before in the prayer polls, we are like quite a few people talked about lack of resource, right? So for us, it's very important that we can also help our clients or mission organizations to maintain the things that we give them, and with very little cost. So, or that we can do all of it for them at very little effort. So that's definitely something that we always have to consider. Now, the things that we have been evaluating and using in the past are here in the center of the screen. I know there are many more. These are the ones we have. All of them we have looked at. We have used some of them. We have used others. But just so you get an idea where we're coming from. So Drupal, I think that's most of you will know that. Basically a content management system. CV CRM, which is a CRM, obviously. Very well known in the non-profit area for CRM. Odoo and ERP Next are 2 open source ERPs. And then Salesforce, I think most of you know as well. Yeah, so I think that is what we have seen is being used in many places when we entered the field in that sense. What people recommend it. And yeah, I think maybe Navision would be here too. One part that's often used actually already. Yeah. So that is roughly the base context that I want to give. So where we have been like 3-4 years ago. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so road blockers. So looking at these technologies and what we want to do with them, we hit different problems during building multiple solutions, right? So yeah, so here we have some, well, road blockers may be too much of a term. It's more like things that make the implementation of a viable solution very, very difficult. So one of the first is licensing. Proprietary licenses and cloud setups are, I mean, sometimes they might be good, but in our case, they are of a big disadvantages because first is for some of our projects from our clients, there is no questions. We cannot store certain things in the cloud because they're just too sensitive, right? So that removes quite a big chunk of solutions that we could use. And commercial licenses is, I would say, almost always the problem is the price, not only for the client for licensing, buying licenses, but also for us to just get the training or the documentation or the developer licenses that we would need to get into the according system. And maybe this is a good point to mention that obviously we would like to be very proficient at one specific tool that we can use in as many places as possible, right? We cannot be Drupal and SAP experts and also do a little bit of CVCRM, and that would be very inefficient. I hope that's obvious. The licensing, that's the first problem that's the problem. Then next one is I think a limitation in how we can define our data model. I mean, you see, I'm a programmer, so I'll mention a few maybe more problems on a technical level, but many systems, they have a certain, if I think of Drupal or even CVCRM, certain base objects, base models that you need to rely on, and you have to extend on these models, which leads to inflexibility and like prevents. I felt it prevented us in quite a few cases to map a problem directly to a relational model, right? So, I mean, relational model, maybe that's in the younger generation not attractive anymore, but it's a very reliable and well understood way to model things, and you can model almost anything with that. So I would like to yield that power of a relational model, and many tools abstract too much over that, which takes away of the design freedom that we would like to have from the tool. Then customization. This is, I think the problem here is that many tools, they try to offer the end user or the admin user to let the tool customize it, but they forget that actually programmers do most of the customization. Like for example, CVCRM has hooks, so-called hooks, to where we could write plugins and hook into the system and extend the system. And there's just not for everything that you need for is a hook, because the designer of the system, they need to predict basically where you want to do your customizations. So there you have to write workarounds or something, which is a problem. Then user interface. Yeah, sometimes just a problem that we can't adjust it the way we want it, and sometimes it's, or I think in almost all cases, you have no underlying design system or design language, so it feels sometimes a little bit clunky. Like, I mean, open source projects have a bit a name for that, for having such user interfaces, but I think it's all over the board for database applications. And the good ones that I've seen are clouds, commercial cloud services, which you pay quite a bit something for. So that's yeah, that's one point where I find we could have much better things. Then documentation, that's for me, I think as a developer, one of the most important things. I could live with all things bad, but if documentation is missing, lacking, difficult to access, difficult to read, then that makes it almost impossible to develop a good solution. And I think that, yeah, we have very varying degrees of quality there. I think that my worst or my biggest enemy there is Drupal 8. Like Drupal 7 was, I think, much better, but I had to use Drupal 8 since quite a few years, and the documentation I find is very lacking in details, and you have to go very often back to the code and read, and there's no documentation about concepts and things like that. So comparing to other projects which do a better job. And then deployment is also, I mean, this falls into the category also of maintenance, but the problem is that some pieces of software or some frameworks or solutions are very hard, like to make a streamlined deployment. So like that you every time have to do a lot of manual work to deploy a single instance, or that it requires a lot of sysadmin work to just back up and update the system, or it is very resource intensive, right? So that you need like 1 gigabyte of RAM just to keep the small database up and running. That's a single instance up and running. That's just too much. And these kind of deployment problems we have encountered quite a few times. Like, for example, CVCRM in the past, I'm not sure how it's today, but in the past it has been a very laborious, quite a labor-intensive process to update it. And for example, like talking about RAM resources, Odoo and ERP Next are really RAM hungry, and on a small lineout instance, I think at maximum deploy 1 or 2 of those instances. So that's not not very good for our hosting build, right? Okay, so these are the rocks, or the not maybe roadblocker, but showstoppers. They at least make the life difficult that we have these shortcomings in almost every tool that we encounter. So okay, so now we're here, and the question was, mostly I have seen these problems coming up, and we discussed them internally with other team members. And we thought, yeah, but like maybe we should come up with something better. I mean, if you're already complaining, right? We should have a better idea. And so we thought about a few different things, and it was obvious we cannot start totally from scratch, right? So we have to go to a level where we can start to develop the application logic, and don't need to write HTTP handlers or things like that, or our custom object relationship mapper, things like that. So what we chose at that time was Django. I just started using it some time ago, and it felt really, really good because it was in a very good level between like high abstraction and low abstraction. So it just gave you all the things that you need to implement a web application, but it left a lot of freedom, like what type of application you had to implement. So I think compared to the other tools that I listed before, Django is in that sense a very low level tool with coming very little things out of the box, but all the things that come with it are very reliable. That's why we choose it. And going quickly back to the things that I mentioned before where we had problem, licensing with Django is very good. They have a new style BSD license, which is it even gives more freedom than the GPL, or it's let's call it business friendly, right? So open source, but we can still do the code what we want, more or less. Django can map very close to the relational model, so meaning to SQL. We can map almost everything. I say almost. There's a few limitations, but otherwise it's very clear how will our models be mapped into SQL, and it's very straightforward, which leaves a lot of room for us to design models that are close to the problem domain. Well, Django has also a few established ways of customizing things with their app system. It's yeah, how to say it? There's not like a special plugin system or something, but there are all the ways to configure your application are really straightforward, or to hook into certain things. They have different levels of ways you can customize something. And because it's very low level, there is really not that much need to customize anything, because you have to come up with a lot of the things by yourself already. So then UI, we have a cross here, a crossed out, because basically Django comes with basically no user interface. You have to write your own HTML front end. Of course, people know Django know there is the Django Admin package, which is part of Django and which provides you a simple admin user interface, but it's not as powerful as you want a real database application to be, or you would rely on a lot of additional modules to go to the place where it's really like capable, and still the user interface is also not super well designed, I would say. So that is not really something that you want to build on, but we'll come back to that in a moment. And then documentation. I think Django has an extraordinarily good documentation. Actually, I heard complaints, but I'm not really sure how you can complain. It's I think very well written. Like you have to read a lot, but if you read, I mean, maybe it's my generation. We still had to read books in school, right? I'm not sure if I still have to do that today. But reading through the documentation gives a lot of insight how things work, and also explains like basic things about HTTP or HTML, which are helpful to understand the framework as a whole with the underlying technologies. So that's for me one of the very big plus points there. And a lot of contribution modules do that as well. So it's not only the core framework, but additions there. And then deployment. Django has been deployed since I think now around 15 years in production in many different scenarios. And for those of you who know, it's called this kind of app, the Apple app, where people can have voice chat in some rooms. I don't remember the name. It was last year. Was a big thing coming up. I somehow wrote it down, but I'm lost in my notes. So, anyway, but what I was talking about is that app is like I think a few million users, and the database backend is handled by Django and the API. So Django is really well established for production deployments on a wide scale. That's maybe not interesting for us, but we have so many options. It's very well established. And it's very stable, the deployment in production. So that I think that's important for us too, and very streamlined as well. So yeah, so the problem with the user interface. So obviously we had to come up with something for our user interface, right? Because that's the core part of the application in the end, for at least for the end user. And I think actually it's a very interesting part, because to me it feels that so many database frameworks or database tools come with a very bad user interface, and maybe I don't need to go into the reason why I think that is the case, but I think it's pretty often. And so we thought, okay, it makes in any way a sense to develop something that is consistent, uses like a unified design language, and that has also an API that developers can use easily. And what we choose as the basis of that was the Carbon design system from IBM, I guess it was to some part arbitrary in a sense. There's so many different design systems, but I think the important thing for us was that we have this well-defined design system that has been designed by UX and UI experts, which also comes with a concrete implementation with web components. So like React or JavaScript, they have different implementations, right? So that was important because we had one designer on board at the time, and he really put a lot of effort into our into the feedback and our implementations that we would try to be as consistent as possible with that design system. And even now when we are developing applications, we can still go back and read the design language, design system, and understand, okay, like we have this situation, we have like this model with this many buttons, and what would be the correct way by this design system to arrange them. So that's what we basically have been doing. I think most of the work we've been doing is around writing the user interface components and making them composable and auto-generate where we can during the past 2 years. And yeah, so that has been a core part. Okay, now that leads us to where we are today. What we have today is now we finally come to the word breadth. So we have this kind of construct, and I mean sometimes I use the word framework, but I think I like to look at it more rather like to look at it as a set of tools or a tool belt that we can use to build applications. It's not so much of a framework as maybe Django or other. Yeah, so bread, because it's our daily bread, right? No, of course, because some of you might know browse, read, edit, add, delete. It's a kind of a database concept. Or maybe you were familiar more with CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Or of course, here in Thailand, we would call it RICE, read, insert, clear, edit. Although that's just made up, that last one. But the first two you might have heard in the context of database applications. Sorry, big water. Okay, so yeah, we decided to call it breadth, and it's actually a little bit more than just browse, read, edit, and delete, of course, because a modern database application needs to do much more than that. We have, of course, these operations, but what we provide out of the box with bread, or what bread can provide, if you choose to use it, if you choose to use the components, are user interface components and layouts or tools to help you layout the user interface. Then we have authentication and user management, which is mostly done by Django, but we have it well integrated. Then export of any data, which is sometimes very significant, especially like things like Excel, downloading any data tables as Excel files or things like that. Then reports, user-defined reports, filtering and searching of data. And what we just added, I think we just merged that last week, is automated actions via triggers. This is still highly experimental, but this is also coming now. So these are more kind of the high-level things that come out of the box, oriented to end users. But because I actually wanted to keep the talk a bit oriented to developers, so I would like to show a few examples of how we would use the APIs or these components. What I'm going to show is all in a Django context. So if you're not familiar with Django, it might not be like that obvious to you how things work, but it fits you use like a standard Django project, and then you just plug in these things that I'm going to show you basically. Okay. So first example that I want to show here is On the left side, you see a short piece of code, which is the urls.py file from, it could be from any Django project. It's a standard Django file. And our thread framework now here provides a very high level, function, quick register. And what you can do with that is just register a model, a Django model, to the user interface, and it will produce the user interface for that model. Now, what is a model? We have here the to-do model that we call, like, from to-do model to import to-do, right? This is just a very simple model I quickly came up with. It's actually from our documentation, and it maps to a single SQL data table, or a single database table. So there's just like a few fields, and you get to see all the fields here. And this is basically just you can imagine this very simple case to be just a UI for a single database table, right? But there's a lot of things here. We have filtering by text. You can add new items. We have batch operations where we have a few defaults defined, like Excel download and deleting. You can sort the columns, edit, delete stuff. We have paging if you have a lot of items. And one thing that's often a little bit overlooked, but that we had to focus on because I think partly to our international kind of clientship is localization. So this is all like ready for translation and localization, and it works pretty well. We're always fixing things. So yeah, that's a few things here. So that we can do that with just very little very little code, right? Of course, this is a very high-level call. This is just a single function call, but this is composed of then other function calls which you can use if you want to customize more of the system, right? But like for doing prototyping and stuff, this is very helpful. Then yeah, and here is an example. So here the first page here is like the browse. The browse view to list all the objects, and this would be an example of the edit screen. And this is all automatically generated, right? This is taken out of the of the definition of the data model, and that's how we render all these fields. And here on the left side, we also see the menu, which is also automatically adding a menu item here for the to-do data table. Yeah, so data tables, I think that's it's a very core thing. Like if you think about it, people are extensively using Excel files for anything, right? And then and then there's a reason for that, right? Because tabular or tables seem to be very helpful to structure like multiple records of similar data, and it's actually something that we need to use very often. So there is one component that's designed by the Carbon design framework called data table, which in the simplest case that is shown here can just display a table, for example. So just to give an impression how we could use something like that, you have a list of objects, here a list of strings with names. These are all attendees of the conference, by the way. Then here, data table, this is a function call now. In the context of our framework, this would be one component, and we can compose multiple components to be composed of other elements. So think of it like Lego bricks, right? So we take a few Lego bricks and make one piece or one tool, and you can reuse that in another place, or can even take it apart again and stick it together again. So here we have the data table component that we're creating. This is all server side, by the way, Python, just for information. And yeah, so we pass this name list to the row iterator argument, and this will create, like, for each entry of the name list, it will create one row. We can specify which columns we want to have. Here we have two columns. Data table column, the header of the table, and then here this expression is basically extracting the object from the context. So every row will have its own context, and the current object of the current row is called row in the context. So we can use that similar to a variable name you can indicate. And then here, the second column is a little bit an extended example. Also, the table name is description, and here is the wrong table header name. So sorry for that. This must be an early screenshot, and I changed it in the code, but not in the screenshot. But then you see here is where I come back to this, what I said before, the component concept, right? So here we have a div, an HTML div, which contains a string, and then again the value of the current context, which is just a string name, and then we can also add HTML attributes. So this is all very HTML focused. So our whole component system is based on the idea that we have a DOM tree, a document object model that we are working on, like in modern JavaScript frameworks, you're using that in very intense. On the server side, this has been like, it seems like nobody's using that, but we're using it very heavily. That we basically work with the DOM, with the HTML documents as a tree of objects on the server side, which gives us a few nice advantages. For example, you can't do any typos in your HTML, so that's the thing of the past for us. So yeah, that would be data table is one of the most complicated components. Here's a second example where we have the same thing as before, now just a single column, but we add here now with toolbar, and we do that often with many components. Like it supports some kind of addition or wrapping or like special configuration, where we can add now here a title, which will show up like this, and a primary button, which can come up here, and we can add many more things until the table would look like this more complex example that we have here. So that is how we reduce that. Okay. Now the second last example that I want to bring up is very often we need a custom form, or like you have the page to add a new object and you want to customize it, and here would be an example how we would add a second add view called simple add, which is using this thing called add view, which is a breadth view, a default breadth view, but we just want to have the two fields, what and the creator of our to-do node. And so we can just plug that in, and then we get a new add view, which we can display anywhere in the user interface where we need it. Right. So yeah, I think I'm not going to explain too much about that here. They're just adding like custom forms or custom pages is really straightforward. The next one thing that we often use, that's always like question, how do we do with that? Also in Drupal or in CVCRM, for example, if you want to have a custom Ajax model, we have here an example of a very nice shortcut. We have a button, so that is down here with with a name open in modal, and we want this button to trigger modal and to display some page that is fetched from the server. Oh, 15 minutes. Oh, okay, I'm a bit late. Yeah, we're almost there. Stay with me. So yeah, and then so here the first part would be definition of the model. We could just create like a model with any content, or we have a shortcut for models that fetch content from the server. So this model here would fetch the page, so that what you see inside the model here is fetched from a URL from the server, and this here is the shortcut that generates basically this form here. So this is what we registered with Quick Register before. And you could put in here any URL you want. Could be just a plain string, google.com, and it would load google.com inside the model, right? So very composable again. The idea is always composability. And then here we do this function modal with trigger. We use that to combine the modal and the button, and we will have a page button on the page we can click, and the modal will go. Okay. And then the last example is custom settings, because that's something that I don't know, that I feel is sometimes also much more effort in other frameworks than I would like it to have to be. It's like, do I have some global settings like a name or a flag or something that people want to be able to set? And here we're using dynamic preferences registry, which is an additional Django module, but it allows us to very easily plug in any additional settings we want. So what we do here, we have here this decorator to register a new preference. And here we can give a name that can be any way. We would call this one, maybe use this for another login greeting. And so that would be a string preference. Yeah, we can assign then a setting to every preference needs to be in a setting. We can specify a name which we need to access the preferences in the code, and we can specify default value and the verbose name for the label that you see over here. And just declaring this will allow us to have these preferences generated in the user interface, which is very handy if you have different parts of the database that need to have different settings configurable by the user. Or like things like API keys, for example, are very common. We use it for that as well. Okay, so that is basically the end of what I wanted to show you about Thread itself. I quickly want to tell you where it's now used in production currently, because that's a question that has always been coming up in the past. So we have a legacy version, which is which we developed in the first iteration, but which was way too high level, and which was not using Carbon design, but a different UI system. But still many ideas and improvements from that legacy bright version have flown into the new system. So I thought it would be appropriate to bring it up here as well. We have currently 3 different pieces of software that are built with the old bright system. One is a media archiving and publishing system that's right now used by CAF, the Central Asian Fellowship. We actually developed a stock application, like a commercial project, which is used in 7 different shops at the moment over here in Thailand. And we use the legacy for tracking our invoices, times, hours, and accounting internally in our company, in the Thailand company. So, and these are all systems that have been running now for a few years, but they're legacy. So now with the new version, we power currently basx Connect, which is a lightweight CRM, which I talked about last year, and this is currently used with 2 organizations, 2 smaller organizations that use that CRM in production for their contact management, and some part of it for donations, although we don't have very good support for that. The second one is Ichthys. Ichthys is based on basx Connect, but it's modified to be usable as a church management tool for membership management. And it is really heavy localized for Thai. So we have, for example, integrated the Buddhist year, the Buddhist calendar, which has offset of around 530 or 40 something years. So if you localization things there. Yeah, then there's 2 other projects. With these 2 projects here are currently in work, full process in the middle of the project. One is a membership, sorry for that, membership volunteer missionary management tool, Next. You can think of it like a, I don't know, HR management tool for an international non-profit organization. which is, yeah, there is many things that, like, especially legal regulations and information that need to be inside such a system. So this is going to be our biggest project so far with the framework. And then there's one project called User Admin 2, which is for WEC centralized identity management with multiple sources, which means like we have to be able to talk to Drupal and talk to an LDAP server or a mail server, and we have to talk to Office 365, and we have to have a single place where we can add new identities, and then having these identities created within Drupal, within the mail server, and within Office 365, depending on the permissions or the level of membership that the person has, and things like that. So also much more focus on workflows and a bit more complex. So yeah, that's it. The future, very quickly. We want to mainly stabilize and improve things and make things easier. I think that the basic things that we want are here. A few more concrete things, that improvements that we're planning is improving the API in general. To make it easier to use, we want to be as developer-friendly as possible. Having more support for GDPR and friends operations, so like erasing and blanking and making sure that things are really deleted from the database, and also having reports like what data we have and how old is it and things like that. Documentation. We have existing documentation, but it's not fully complete yet. It's definitely usable, but we want especially to have more examples, like things that I showed you before, which people can just follow one-to-one and test out how things work. More tests, obviously, because we always use more tests. We have some tests. They're very generic tests, because I have a bit of the attitude I want to write a test only once and then never touch it again, even if I do, or especially if I do refactorings and things like that. So yeah, then more automated functionality, so that that means we can derive more from the data model, and that the developer has to write less specification. Then, yeah, and then customizability of the interface by the user, things like that users can select which columns they want to see and which they don't want to see, to like customize their reports a bit more, things like that. And the last two are more for the whole dependency management issue, so like versioning and setting constraints in our dependency, so that people can rely more on like, okay, this version is supported for this and this Django versions and things like that. That is currently not really strongly defined, so that's something that we want to improve. And also supply chain reliability and security. We have a few things there already, but it's getting a more important topic, especially if you look at last year. There have been software supply chain attacks that people try to inject bad code into widely used libraries, and so that's something that we keep an eye on and that we're planning to add a few improvements. Yeah, and then I think the time is almost up, so I will not go about the few researches that we're doing. We also have a project with a few students, with some students from a Swiss university, because like, yeah, some things we really want to get to at some point, but they're too big to be in the backlog right now. So yeah, and maybe what we'll not be doing is having any special plugin or extension mechanism like other systems have, like Drupal or CVCRM, because what Django has, I think, is enough. Then what we will, I think, likely never allow is to let people define custom fields through the user interface, because this is just, we want to handle migration on the level of the code. I think in most cases, in my experience, it had always been an advantage if a field has to be added, and the developer has thought about it and kind of approved it, even if it's just like a simple node field. It's just because we know how the data model looks like, and our workflows are designed around that we define how the data model looks. How the data model looks. Sorry, I'm feeling kind of rushed because the hour is almost over. Right? And we will never use a modern JS front-end framework because that would increase the complexity of the whole framework enormously. And we write JavaScript, right? We use that, but we always try that the API does not require the programmer to have any knowledge about JavaScript. So the front-end stuff should be handled as automatic as possible without too much knowledge about internal workings. And yeah, there's a few other reasons, but I will not go into that. Yeah, so we made it. I'm not sure what time do we have. It's almost full hour, so sorry for being a bit long. I still hope you got something out of it. Here are a few links. I think there will be, I think I have to put the presentation on the next cloud, right?
If you can either upload it yourself or I can do it for you.
Yeah, okay, okay.
So
yeah, so the
recording.
yeah, I can stop, yeah.